They said it was an accident. But within 12 hours, the truth was buried deeper than the body itself. On a quiet September night in Beijing, news began to circulate with unsettling speed. The Chinese actor Yu Menglong had died. The location was a luxury apartment. The cause, according to police, was simple. An accidental fall. Alcohol intoxication. Case closed. There was no press conference. There was no autopsy. There was no publicly released surveillance footage. And yet, the conclusion arrived with astonishing certainty. Within half a day, authorities announced that there was nothing more to investigate. The death of a public figure, followed by nearly 30 million people on Chinese social media, had been reduced to a brief statement. Efficient. Final. Forgettable. But something about the silence that followed felt unnatural. Almost immediately, Yu Menglong's name began to disappear. Searches returned errors. Posts vanished. Accounts were suspended. Entire threads collapsed into digital nothingness. Even indirect references, coded phrases, and symbolic mentions were flagged and erased. It was as if language itself had been instructed to forget him. This was not the quiet of mourning. It was the quiet of enforcement. In the Chinese entertainment industry, silence often speaks louder than grief. When an entire system chooses not to react, it suggests coordination rather than coincidence. Actors remained silent. Agencies issued no condolences. State media moved on as if nothing of significance had occurred. We are told this was done to prevent rumors. We are told this was done to protect the family. We are told this was necessary. But history teaches us that truth does not fear questions. Power does. Yu Menglong was not an obscure figure. He was young, successful, visible. He represented years of careful image construction in an industry tightly bound to state influence and commercial control. His sudden death, paired with the speed at which his story was sealed, created a contradiction that refused to disappear. When a death is truly accidental, transparency is often its strongest ally. Reports are shared. Evidence is shown. Questions are answered, even if painfully. Here, the opposite occurred. The less the public knew, the faster they were told to stop asking. And so the questions multiplied. Why was there no autopsy in a case involving a fall from height? Why were no investigative details released to the public? Why did censorship escalate instead of reassurance? These questions did not originate from conspiracy. They emerged from absence, from missing procedures, from gaps where explanation should have existed. Outside China, the story began to take on a second life. Online commentators, independent investigators, and members of the Chinese diaspora started piecing together fragments left behind. Screenshots, timelines, deleted posts remembered by those who saw them before they vanished. None of it proved anything. But all of it suggested one thing. This was not just a death. It was an event that someone needed to control. And the more aggressively that control was applied, the clearer it became that Yu Menglong's story was never meant to linger. It was meant to end quickly, quietly, and without residue. Yet here we are. Because some stories do not end when authorities say they should. They end when the last unanswered question finally stops echoing. And in this case, the questions were only beginning. And the more the authorities tried to erase his name, the louder the questions became. In the hours following Yu Menglong's death, the narrative presented to the public was narrow and controlled. A young man drank too much. He lost his balance. He fell. There was tragedy, but no mystery. At least that was the version intended to survive. Yet when investigators, journalists, and ordinary observers revisited the fragments left behind, the simplicity of that explanation began to fracture. Yu Menglong was not merely an individual navigating private struggles. He was a commercial asset. His image, schedule, contracts, and public behavior were all carefully managed within an industry where autonomy was rarely granted and easily revoked. To understand why his death resonated beyond personal loss, one must first understand the degree to which his life was not entirely his own. For years, Yu had been represented by an agency with deep institutional ties. His career followed a familiar pattern: early exposure, rapid rise, carefully curated roles, controlled interviews, every step designed to maximize visibility while minimizing unpredictability. In such systems, success is rarely accidental, but neither is survival. What unsettled online investigators was not merely that Yu had died, but that he had reportedly been attempting to leave. According to multiple independent accounts, Yu had been seeking to terminate or renegotiate his management contract. In isolation, this was not extraordinary. Artists often clash with agencies over creative direction and control. But within highly centralized systems, such attempts can be perceived not as negotiation, but as defiance. Leaving was never simply about professional freedom. Leaving meant disrupting financial arrangements. Leaving meant loosening a grip that had been firmly established. Within days of Yu's death, attention turned to the agency itself. Observers noted that a senior executive associated with the company resigned unexpectedly shortly after the incident. No explanation was given. The timing, however, was impossible to ignore. While resignation alone proves nothing, it added another thread to an already tangled narrative. Then, there were the allegations Yu had reportedly uncovered before his death. According to claims circulating online, Yu had discovered irregularities involving the use of his name in illicit financial activities. Arms transactions, money laundering, deals that relied on reputational cover rather than direct involvement. The most disturbing detail was not the allegation itself, but the method by which Yu was said to have responded. He documented it. The claim suggested that Yu had stored evidence on a portable storage device. A small object, easy to hide, easy to destroy, easy to lose. And yet, if such a device existed, it would have transformed Yu from a passive participant into a liability. This allegation has never been confirmed. No device has been produced. No official acknowledgement exists. But the rumor persisted because it answered a question the official narrative could not. It explained motive. As online researchers dug deeper, they began noticing patterns that extended beyond Yu Menglong. His death echoed earlier cases involving other entertainers who had died under similarly ambiguous circumstances. In two instances, the individuals were managed by the same agency. In both cases, deaths were ruled accidental. In both cases, investigations concluded quickly. In both cases, public discussion was discouraged. Patterns by themselves do not establish causation, but they do establish precedent. When unrelated tragedies follow identical procedural responses, scrutiny becomes inevitable. The similarities did not end with investigative outcomes. Observers pointed out symbolic overlaps. Personal items, footwear, locations, details that, while individually insignificant, collectively formed an unsettling symmetry. These connections were amplified when images from a later art exhibition surfaced, displaying objects strikingly similar to those associated with the deceased. Art in this context became less a medium of expression and more a mirror of unease. Still, it is important to acknowledge the limits of what can be responsibly claimed. None of these observations constitute proof. They exist in the space between documentation and speculation. But in environments where information is tightly controlled, absence itself becomes data. And there was much absence. No public release of witness statements. No explanation for procedural deviations. No transparency regarding the decision to forego an autopsy. These omissions fueled an alternative line of inquiry. Perhaps Yu Menglong did not die because he was reckless. Perhaps he died because he was no longer compliant. This interpretation does not require elaborate conspiracy. It requires only the recognition that systems built on control rarely tolerate unpredictability. When individuals attempt to exit such systems while holding information that could compromise others, consequences can escalate rapidly. In that context, Yu's reported desire to leave his agency takes on a darker significance. It reframes his death not as an isolated tragedy, but as a potential enforcement action. A warning. Or at the very least, a resolution of risk. We must be careful here. Speculation thrives where facts are withheld. And certainty remains elusive. But even without definitive answers, one reality becomes clear. Yu Menglong's death cannot be understood solely as a personal failure or an unfortunate accident. It sits at the intersection of power, money, reputation, and silence. It exists within a structure that rewards obedience and punishes deviation, often quietly, often efficiently. And perhaps that is why the response was so swift. Why the story was closed before it could breathe. Why forgetting was not merely encouraged, but enforced. Because leaving was never the dangerous part. Knowing too much was. Leaving was never the dangerous part. Knowing too much was. If Yu Menglong's death raised questions, the location where many of those questions converged transformed suspicion into something far more tangible. Attention shifted from abstract systems to a physical space. A place with walls, hallways, staff, and records. The Bvlgari Hotel in Beijing. Luxury spaces are designed to disappear from scrutiny. Their purpose is discretion. Privacy is not merely a service, it is a product. For powerful guests, such environments offer insulation from consequence. What happens inside is meant to remain inside. That expectation of silence is precisely what made the hotel central to the unfolding controversy. In the days following Yu Menglong's death, a public dispute erupted between two figures connected to the case. Screenshots of private messages were released. Accusations were exchanged. Legal threats were announced. At first glance, the conflict appeared chaotic, emotional, and unplanned. But chaos can be staged. One party claimed to have met a director at the Bvlgari Hotel on the evening before Yu's death. To support her account, she released payment records. A paper receipt. An electronic invoice. On the surface, they appeared to confirm her presence at the hotel restaurant. The total matched. The items listed were ordinary. Everything seemed routine. It was not. Independent observers quickly noticed inconsistencies that could not be explained by coincidence. The paper receipt bore no signs of age. No creases. No wear. It appeared as though it had been printed recently, despite allegedly being weeks old. More troubling was the timestamp. According to the receipt, the meal concluded shortly after 7 in the evening. Yet screenshots of messages between the same individuals showed active conversation well after that time. If they were seated together, why were they communicating digitally? The explanation strained credibility. Then came the electronic invoice. The invoice confirmed the same total amount, but the screenshot revealed something unexpected. The status icons indicated the image had been captured on an Android device. This detail mattered. Both individuals involved were known to use iPhones. The question became unavoidable. Whose phone was it? There were only a few possibilities. A third party present at the meal, a hotel employee, or someone else entirely. Each scenario carried implications. If a third party had been present, the meeting was no longer private. If hotel staff had provided the image, the hotel itself had entered the narrative. That was the moment when the hotel ceased to be a neutral backdrop. Additional material began to surface. Video footage, allegedly recorded inside a luxury suite, circulated quietly among online investigators. The clip was never released publicly. Its contents were described instead. The floor pattern, an octagonal design, matched the Bvlgari Hotel's interior. Voices were heard. A man was screaming. The name Yu Menglong was spoken. Most disturbing was the alleged purpose of the violence. According to those who viewed the footage, individuals were attempting to force Yu to expel a swallowed USB drive. Whether this detail is accurate remains unverified. But the allegation aligned with earlier rumors that Yu possessed physical evidence he refused to surrender. If true, it suggested the hotel was not merely a meeting place, but a site of coercion. The implications were severe. Hotels maintain extensive surveillance systems. Corridors, elevators, entrances, suites. Nothing of significance occurs without some record. If violence took place inside the Bvlgari Hotel, then someone knew. If evidence existed and was not released, then silence was not accidental. Public reaction was swift. Online reviews of the hotel collapsed. Accusations flooded comment section. One phrase appeared repeatedly. You enter standing. You leave lying down. The hotel issued no comprehensive statement. No explanation was offered regarding the alleged footage, the receipts, or the timestamps. The absence of response became its own message. As scrutiny intensified, further claims emerged. According to online commentators, Yu Menglong had been lured to the hotel days earlier and held there for an extended period. Drugged, restrained, subjected to psychological and physical abuse. Nails removed, threats made, performances staged. These claims are unverified. They rely on anonymous sources. They cannot be confirmed independently. But once again, their persistence stemmed from a single fact. No transparent refutation was provided. When institutions are innocent, they often defend themselves with clarity. When they are implicated, silence becomes strategy. The idea that a luxury hotel could be complicit in wrongdoing may seem extreme. But history demonstrates that prestige does not guarantee integrity. Hotels have long served as discrete stages for transactions that cannot survive daylight. Their value lies precisely in what they do not reveal. If the Bvlgari Hotel assisted in producing or legitimizing false evidence, then it crossed a threshold. It ceased to be a service provider and became an accessory. At this point, the case shifted. It was no longer solely about Yu Menglong. It was about infrastructure, about how power utilizes space, about how environments designed for privacy can be repurposed for concealment. The receipts were not trivial. The timestamps were not errors. The device mismatch was not accidental. Each detail pointed toward orchestration. And as more fragments accumulated, one conclusion became difficult to avoid. The hotel was no longer just a location associated with the case. It was a mechanism within it. A controlled environment where narratives could be shaped, evidence could be manufactured, and accountability could be delayed indefinitely. When that realization took hold, the questions grew darker. If this was possible here, how many other spaces function the same way? How many truths have been rewritten inside rooms designed to forget? At that point, the Bvlgari Hotel stopped being a hotel. It became a boundary, a place where the official story ended and something far more dangerous began. At that point, the hotel was no longer just a hotel. At a certain point, the case surrounding Yu Menglong stopped resembling a conventional investigation. Facts gave way to symbols. Evidence gave way to imagery. What had begun as questions about contracts and hotel receipts drifted into a darker territory, one shaped by ritual, spectacle, and the unsettling logic of power. The shift occurred when attention turned to Beijing's 798 Art District. Within this industrial complex, known internationally for its galleries and avant-garde exhibitions, a small museum hosted a display that many viewers described as disturbing. The images circulated quietly at first. Then they spread with alarming speed. They showed objects arranged with deliberate care. Shoes, clothing, what appeared to be bones. Each piece positioned as if part of a larger composition. Art invites interpretation. But this was not abstraction. The items bore an uncomfortable resemblance to personal effects associated with individuals who had died under suspicious circumstances in previous years. One name resurfaced repeatedly. A former actor who had died in 2016. His death, like Yu Menglong's, had been ruled accidental. His case, like Yu's, had closed quickly. The coincidence was difficult to dismiss. The exhibition had reportedly been scheduled to coincide with Yu Menglong's own photographic showcase, planned for early September. Yu had visited the venue weeks before his death. He had posted images from the space. Then, without explanation, his exhibition was cancelled. The posts vanished. The space remained, but the narrative changed. What replaced it was something far more unsettling. A young singer, connected to the same cultural circles as Yu, uploaded a series of images to a navigation application review. He praised the venue casually. Parking was convenient. Tickets were inexpensive. The tone was mundane. The images were not. They depicted the same disturbing objects seen in the exhibition. Viewers began drawing connections. The singer appeared in earlier photographs with Yu. Their paths had crossed. Their timelines overlapped. Then came the videos. Grainy footage allegedly recorded through a narrow opening in a residential complex showed figures dragging a man across the ground. Faces were indistinct. Movements were hurried. One silhouette resembled the same singer who had posted the museum images. Another clip, captured from a distance, showed a figure, standing motionless under streetlights, on the night Yu Menglong was believed to have died. None of this constituted proof. All of it constituted unease. As investigators traced these fragments, the narrative expanded again. Political commentary entered the discussion. Anonymous sources suggested that Yu Menglong's death may have served a purpose beyond silencing an individual. It may have been part of a broader struggle, a message encoded in violence. A performance designed not for the public, but for those who understood the language of power. In this interpretation, the death was not merely an outcome. It was a signal. Throughout history, elites have relied on rituals. Not always religious, often symbolic. Dates are chosen carefully. Colors are selected deliberately. Objects carry meaning invisible to outsiders. The more power accumulates, the more superstition tends to follow. Rationality governs the public sphere. Belief governs the private one. Commentators pointed to patterns that, while impossible to verify, followed this logic. Changes of clothing, washing garments after death, hanging them to dry, colors associated with submission or sacrifice, birth dates aligning with numerological significance. These details, dismissed as meaningless by authorities, were treated as crucial by those who believed Yu's death had been staged according to an internal script. This is where the case becomes most dangerous. Not because these claims are necessarily true, but because they reveal how fear operates in closed systems. When official explanations are insufficient, people search for frameworks that can contain the horror. Ritual offers structure. Symbolism offers meaning. Even speculation offers comfort when silence offers none. But there is another possibility. That the performance was not mystical at all. That it was psychological. Violence, when displayed selectively, can function as deterrence. When framed symbolically, it transcends individual punishment and becomes collective warning. The exhibition, the images, the rumors, they did not need to be real to be effective. They needed only to be believed by the right audience. And perhaps that was the point. Yu Menglong's death may have been transformed into a narrative weapon. A story whispered rather than spoken. A cautionary tale reinforced by spectacle. Not to convince the public, but to remind insiders of the consequences of deviation. At that stage, the investigation reached a threshold. Beyond it lay only speculation, and speculation is where responsibility dissolves. Yet turning away entirely felt equally irresponsible. We are left with fragments, artifacts, videos that cannot be authenticated, patterns that cannot be proven, and a silence so comprehensive that it suggests design. Whether or not Yu Menglong's death involved ritual, the structure surrounding it behaved ritualistically. The timing, the containment, the symbolic aftershocks. Everything followed a sequence designed to produce compliance through uncertainty. Sometimes, power does not kill to silence. It kills to perform. Sometimes power does not kill to silence. It kills to perform. By the time the final fragments are assembled, the case of Yu Menglong no longer resembles a mystery waiting to be solved. It resembles something far more unsettling. A space deliberately left unfinished. A story engineered not to convince, but to exhaust. There is no definitive conclusion. There is no final piece of evidence. And there is no official reckoning. What remains is a collection of contradictions. A death ruled accidental without the procedures that normally justify such certainty. A wave of censorship that replaced explanation. A network of people, places, and symbols connected not by proof, but by proximity to silence. It would be easy to dismiss everything discussed as rumor. Many have done so. Authorities have warned against irresponsible speculation. Lawyers have issued statements urging restraint. Official language has emphasized social stability and the protection of families. These responses are familiar. They are not unique to this case. But restraint does not answer questions. And stability, when enforced through erasure, breeds only deeper instability beneath the surface. We must acknowledge what we do not know. We do not know what happened inside that apartment. We do not know whether the alleged videos exist. We do not know who, if anyone, orchestrated the events that followed. We do not know whether Yu Menglong uncovered information that placed him in danger. What we do know is this. The mechanisms of response were disproportionate to the explanation provided. When a system reacts with overwhelming force to suppress discussion, it invites the very doubt it seeks to eliminate. Transparency diffuses suspicion. Silence amplifies it. And in this case, silence was not passive. It was active, strategic, relentless. Some will argue that the truth is irrelevant, that the world moves on regardless, that one life, however tragic, does not justify collective obsession. Perhaps they are right. But history suggests otherwise. The most consequential truths are rarely those that are officially confirmed. They are the ones that linger unresolved. The ones that refuse to be forgotten, because forgetting was demanded too aggressively. The ones that survive not through belief, but through repetition. Yu Menglong's story does not demand that we accept any single theory. It does not require faith in conspiracies or rituals or hidden elites. It requires only that we recognize how power behaves when it feels threatened. Power simplifies. Power closes cases quickly. Power prefers narratives that end cleanly. What it does not prefer are questions that remain open. And so the final discomfort of this case lies not in what may have happened to Yu Menglong, but in what happened afterward. In how easily an entire public was instructed to move on. In how rapidly digital memory was erased. In how silence became policy rather than pause. Perhaps the truth will surface one day. Perhaps it never will. But the absence of answers does not mean the absence of meaning. Sometimes the truth does not need to be believed. It only needs to be forgotten. And when forgetting becomes mandatory, remembering becomes an act of resistance. And perhaps the most disturbing part is not how Yu Menglong died, but how easily the world was told to move on.